as filmmakers at times can be blinded by a fantasy of ourselves as individual artists working on our own independently of others. Our entertainment culture revels in the triumph of the individual will, and that bias causes many of us to tweak the storylines of our own careers to fit it. The classic example of this, and maybe some of you have seen this, is the notorious question and answer session where the filmmaker takes sole credit for the film as if they'd made it entirely on their own. I mean, most documentary filmmakers are very gracious people, but occasionally you may have heard a filmmaker speak after a screening and say something like, "This was a film that I've spent the last 7 years doing entirely on my own." And you know, sure, there are some exceptional cases where a filmmaker did do it all on their own, but it's very rare. And part of the reason I think people say that is because we do feel that way some of the time, like we're all alone. Because taking creative and financial risks is hard, and it can give you feelings of isolation, if not sheer panic. But most often, I think, when a filmmaker says that they made a film on their own, they're playing into some vague but persistent notion of the rugged individualist as filmmaker. And I think this is a uniquely American spin on the French notion of the auteur, the artistic genius who brings something into the world out of thin air. And I really came to see this and feel this way when I made the transition from producer to director. Because the first films I worked on at Arts Engine were as a producer. And then when I made a film as a director, Deadline, it was a hit on the festival circuit and it got a lot of media attention. And I was struck by the contrast in the attention that Kirsten Johnson and I got as co-directors on Deadline compared to what I got as a producer. I mean, when you're a producer on the road with a film, you're pretty much operating in the constant fog of like, what am I, chopped liver? You know, that's just basically the feeling. Whereas the reality was that I put my heart and soul into those films I produced. But our system of credit sharing and acknowledgement of film roles didn't really accommodate the reality of the teamwork of how we make films at Arts Engine and how many of you probably make films. I mean, I used to watch Deadline. You know, when you make a film, you watch it over and over again. And often I would watch it and just think things like, okay, that shot is there because our editor, Kate, insisted on it, and that scene is there because Angela loves it, and Kirsten stayed late to get that shot, and that whole section of the film is only there because one of our advisors told us to film it when we didn't really know what kind of story we wanted to tell. I mean, and we, the directors, did all that? No. We do a lot as directors. It's a heavy lift and it's creatively challenging, but it's just not that simple. So, even though teamwork is at the core of how films are made, this myth of the genius author in filmmaking persists. It is up to all of us working in film to remind ourselves and each other and the public how creativity is really a social product. It's an amazing mix of ideas, the origins of which we can rarely, if ever, clearly identify. And in my mind, this is what makes art magical. And when originality is largely individual, I actually find it less amazing. I mean, maybe that's just me. So in thinking about collaboration, I noticed something interesting, which is this attachment that we have to the idea that films are the product of brilliant individuals manifesting their vision on the screen. It's paralleled by the stories we see and tell, which are frequently about individuals who triumph over adversity. And don't get me wrong, I love these stories. They are inspiring and uplifting, and they often have happy endings. I mean, I could probably watch, you know, Dennis Quaid and The Rookie like once a week for the rest of my life, and it would just be like a antidepressant. I mean, they're really fun to watch, and occasionally I get a wave of relief that all is right in the world when I see one. And certainly individuals can make a difference in our society. To say otherwise would be ridiculous. What I'm noting here is a preference on the part of the gatekeepers and the leaders and the teachers, a leaning towards stories that fit into the celebration of the individual. And the reason it's important to be aware of this is that because we as filmmakers are living in a world in which these stories are expected of us. And this pull toward this kind of storytelling, it's hard to withstand. And for those of us making the films, that's a constant pressure, but I think it's also a pressure for those of us who are granting entry to filmmakers, to festivals, to broadcast venues, et cetera.